Hey, going live. So just wanted to really share a story. Today, I want to share some very important things that I think everyone can benefit. I would not be saying this unless I really believe that it could help you. So, first, understand this. We'll start it out with this. Job security is an oxymoron. Job security. And if you think about it, you already know this. There is no real security in having a job. And what would Dave do? And I'll tell you more about Dave. That's my dad. My dad, Dave, an uneducated man that I never seen work a 9 to 5, but worked all his life, worked hard, owned his own little piece of land, and that gave him freedom. And I'll tell you about the freedom. And if you don't own some assets, it doesn't have to necessarily be, but in this case, it was just a small piece of real estate land. It was farmland, and it wasn't even cleared initially. So the trees and so forth that had to be cleared, but it gave him freedom. And I heard this and I felt it as a kid. I was probably 12 years old, and my dad owned these 19 acres of land that he had gotten. And when went to the army and saved a little money, came back, bought some acres of land. And around the area where I come from in Browntown, a lot of blacks own some property. And I studied a little bit about the history of that little area versus where my mom came from, where everybody was sharecroppers. And there's some beautiful history there. So we can get into that. But the mindset today is about owning. You have to own something. You have to own some assets, and real estate is one of the better ones. And back then, it was farmland, but it gave you independence. It gives you freedom. If you don't own anything, then you're subject, like it was sharecropping. My grandmother lived on farms that were sharecropping, and it was always Mr. This and the farm. And even my dad, and I grew up, in the 50s, 60s, but born in 55. So, early 60s and tobacco, uh, North Carolina, what do they call it, Tobacco Road, and seen a lot of that. And people when they're migrating to the north and leaving the south, and blacks leaving and going to the inner cities for a better job. But I'll tell you, the thing I watched and the incident that really gave me an understanding was at first, my grandmother lived on a Bryant farm. So the country store, it was at the on the Bryant farm, and my dad had grown up with the guy that owned the store, but him being black and the guy being white. My father worked on their land. So here's the thing, though: we're at the store, and my cousins and everybody that lived on the Bryant farm, and like a former plantation. Anyway, the man comes out and he tells my dad, he said, "Dave, I want your boys to stay out of school this week and help me sheet tobacco." And this is a time when tobacco is already cured. It's going to the warehouse and so forth. So then they have to sheet the tobacco. So Dave turned to him, and it was the most amazing thing when he said, "No, Mr. Rob, my boys are going to school, but I can help you. Get on the truck, boys." And I was like, damn, did he just say that to Mr. Rob, this white guy, to everybody, during that time, on the farm in a place like North Carolina? If they say you're staying out of school to work on a farm, you're staying out of school. Matter of fact, one of the guys, my brother was telling me that one of the guys that left, Perry, and Perry moved to New Jersey, he was like, kind of like the big cousin or big brother there, but he was saying the only time he got to go to school was when it rained. And a lot of blacks, that didn't finish school were on those farms that were really tough about things like that. But if you don't own anything, you're at the whim and the mercy of somebody. Now, it may be different if you own it, if you're working a job, but things change and things get hard. And especially now, 2026, there's a lot of people that are without a job, and they're moving around and they're struggling. So that's why I started this thing with job security is an oxymoron. If you don't own anything and you don't determine your own fate, the thing about my dad that was so cool, him not having any, not even graduated sixth grade, he and with 11 kids, all of us in a small house. It was like, but anyway, the most crucial thing was education. He beat the skin off you if you missed your grade. So and he was crazy like that. Education was just at, and he was, you're constrained, to that environment. He still called the white man Mister, even though he come home and he turned the news on, watching and talking about Adam Clayton Powell and all of Huey Newton and the whole thing in the 60s. And we went through that time, and it was, uh, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. At that point, you're trying to come through some things. But I want to just tell the story and just tell a little bit about this man, Dave, and some of the things that I noticed that imprinted on me as a dad. And that's the thing I was so proud of living in a family, 11 kids, one mom and dad, all of us there, and we were all in that same house. But this man, who was kind of private, pulled us aside, and it was kind of crazy the way he was sometimes, with the corporal punishment. But then, and not allowing us to do some of the things that other kids did. But and that was another thing. So. Where my dad is from, okay, Browntown, and you can Google it. I did, and they found some of the things I wanted to know why there was a lot of mulattoes in the area, even though I already knew that. Um, because my mom comes from the dark side of the family, my father comes from this light side, and a lot of mulattoes and so forth around Browntown. And there's a history of the whole thing with Indians and blacks and whites that were mixing in that area. And but I said, well, maybe that was the reason and the mindset of a more freedom and owning land and so forth over in that side of Browntown versus the other side, Institute, where my mom was from. So you find that, and my dad never worked a 9 to 5, so we never saw that. And most of my uncles and aunts and so forth, they own a little land and they worked here and there. I remember one of my father's friends worked at a factory, but my dad even and he had a little no education, but he had his when I was young, he had pulpwood trucks, and he had these guys that would help, and they would go cut pines and people that own a lot of land in Tar Heel State pine trees. So he had groups, and they leave, God, and you could smell those guys. And when they're outside the house, they leave. They were workers, man. They leave early in the morning, like 5 o'clock, and it probably would be about 7:30, 8 o'clock before they get back. They're cutting trees and going back and forth to the mill, the sawmill, to cut, with the trees. But anyway, just to continue about the thing, Dave had this land, and another incident. This guy, Mr. Eugene, who had land adjacent to my dad, and they had some feuds since growing up as kids. But Dave was real private, and like I said, it was kind of crazy when it comes to like corporal punishment, and people just stayed away from him, and he stayed away from other people. We built, his farm was the land like 1/8 of a mile away from the highway, so we were kind of isolated in that way, But then there, when you have land, you have the survey land line. So even a white guy, he had cut some path or something, but one day he had his tractor over there, and he dragged a tree into our yard, and all I remember was Dave running in the house, grabbing the twice barrel, the break 12 gauge shotgun, and grabbing some buckshot, and then loading the two. It's like, and I run outside. My mom run out there. The guys on the tractor, and we knew because Dave was that kind of man. And I'll tell you, and it was like slow motion. So I'm running out, and it's kind of stepping to the side. She's screaming. The man is saying, And so my mom, her nickname is Plute. So he's saying, Plute, talk to him, tell. And Dave had run out, and by that time he had brought the thing, and then he went like this, and my mom was saying, don't step down," because Dave had said, "If you step down, I'm going to cut loose." In my mind, I'm thinking, and everything is going through my head at the same time. I'm thinking, damn, what's gonna happen to my dad? Because he's the lifeblood, and I don't think about. For some reason, that's the only thing that ran through my mind. Shit, we're about to lose our dad. God, because I know he's gonna either go to prison or they're gonna fry him or something. And I wasn't, but my wasn't, because I don't know the white guy except for he's Mr. Eugene, but I know if he stepped down, excuse my language, he's fucked. Dave is going to blast, it. And it was just the scariest thing. And like I said, and it's not about the whole incident there. It's the thought that goes through your mind like that. Like, damn, we lost him. He's gone. But the guy did not step down. He was going to step down and unchain the tree and leave it in our yard. And I don't think he ever came back on that. That was over after that. I mean, it should have been. But then moving on. Okay, so I tell you about Browntown. A lot of the mulattoes in the area, and we all grew up as friends. However, from my mom's side, institute, I had some other friends and cousins, and believe it or not, my nickname, even today when I go back there, is Jig. And at first, a lot of people didn't know, but I knew because my mom's cousin is very dark. So I'm the darkest one in my family. So he would always say, this is my boy here. He'd always give me that hug because he is shared, this thing. And you feel when you're dark like this, you kind of have certain times when you're in a mulatto area and you see that if you're light, bright, damn near white, then you must be right. So, and if you're dark, black, and shine, stay behind, something like that. And you feel that as you pass it through. And a lot of people aren't really aware of the psychology of what's going on. So I think at some point, maybe that was my reason of wanting to achieve certain things to prove people, that damn, you don't have to be, that, because in the black community, I've experienced that quite a bit. I lived in New Orleans, y'all, for almost 10 years. So I know, and I'll come back to something else. But yeah, New Orleans, I kind of experienced that, the Possum Blanc and different things, you go to the clubs, and I was up the clubs in Gentilly and so forth at the time. And I just left Meharry, and my roommate and I, we were both, and he's bright skinned brother, dark, but life, I hadn't run into it like I did when I got there. It was like, you try to dance with somebody and they're bright skinned girl and they just walk away. And it was like, damn, what's going on here? It took a little while for me to adjust to New Orleans. But I have a lot of mulatto friends all over. We don't, because we as black, we're all adjust. Sometimes it was little groups that only intermarry and so forth, and But I could go down that path, but I don't want to go there because I want to tell you about some other things. I'm kind of doing this as documenting some things because also what I'm seeing here, I'm old now, so I have to document a few things and crush some of these things that people are believing, because now in 2026, people act as though some of the things that have happened and so far back that you shouldn't even think about them. But I'm telling you, my lifetime. Do you know? And I went to school in Snow Hill, and there's a little corner there with a store that was owned by a black soul barbecue, and he had a side for blacks and he had a side for white. It was a sit down side, and the tables and so forth. Blacks had a bar and a little stool. So I graduated high school and I got a job at DuPont. I was making some money. Because I worked 2 years before going to college, and but my buddies Skeet and Billy are hanging on the corner up there, and there's drinking some beer and hanging out. But I said, let's get some lunch. And, I stopped there on my day off, and I said, let's get some lunch. And they said, well, yeah, go over here, Pete Price. I never have been in there, but I grew up, rode the bus by there. We on the way to school. And matter of fact, his son went to school with me. But that's another story. But anyway, and I'm still, friends with him. But the man threw me out of this thing, and I walked in the side, and I said, "Yeah, let's go over here and get something to eat." And sat down, and he was in the back, and there was a lot of whites, and everybody stopped eating, and they're looking at us. But I was like, "Damn, I got money!" The first time I had ever had money, I was working. But then he came out of the back with, a little fat guy, and he was pointing a gun to my head, and I was sitting, with my back to the thing, and he put it to my head, and he walked us out. They called the police, and I wound up arrested, and my older brother, had to contact some people in the NAACP, and they made some phone calls and got us out. But I'm telling you, my lifetime, this is getting thrown out of a segregated restaurant and arrested and thrown out during my lifetime. So it's the kind of thing that a lot of people want to dismiss and say, no, it's so far. But you could look at where we are today and see that things aren't uh, what a lot of people would want you to believe that they are. And this is, so I'm just telling you history. And then I left after working a couple of years there at DuPont. My sister, who was at an HBCU, and that's another thing I'm going to tell you. If you have kids that you want to be successful, look at the HBCUs, because I have this story I have to tell you about my family and the HBCUs. And my personal thing, I would not have made it without HBCUs. There's no way I could have gone to, what do you call it, a PWI, a predominantly white institution. I would not. I would not have made it, and I know it. And a lot of people know it because you don't receive that kind of love. And this is not hating on, because I know it's a lot of things. Well, you're anti whatever, reverse racist. I'm not. I'm just telling you. I have the thing is that I know. I'm telling you what I know, and I'll tell you a story that will validate this. And I'm going to deviate because I was going to follow my kind of layout of telling things, but I got to tell you, we'll come back to it. But my niece Sydney, who just graduated magna cum laude from NCCU, and what kind of biological science or chemistry. But anyway, I'll tell you that later. I'm waiting to confirm it in my head here. But her story is a comeback story that went through these HBCUs. And then I have another niece who's graduating Meharry, and a nephew that's graduating Howard Law, and another nephew graduating undergrad. And I'm so happy because that's Dave. Dave pushed those kinds of things, and he'd be proud, And what I'm doing, I think, is just fulfilling Dave's dream. I try to do things, and I tell my son, the things that I do are what I would think Dave would expect me to do. So I'm just continuing to walk down and do what Dave would do. So hopefully that's the same kind of thing that your kids will do, and you could talk about. But education in the Black community, if you pick the road, because when you go to HBCU, there are things that you receive from the people that are there that have the same similar background and understand where you're going and what it's going to be like. I remember when I was at Meharry, there were some things, and of course there's always some type of favoritism, but I was standing outside myself and a couple of friends talking to Dr. Watkins, and another brother walks up, Ricky, and he's like, he kind of stopped, and then for some reason he said, Dr. Watkins, things are not being done fair here. There's girls are getting favoritism and different people. And he said, stop. And let me tell you something, and and this is profound, guys. He said, "Don't you ever think, as a black man, that you're going to walk out of here and things are going to be fair. Get that in your head right now." And it wasn't that, maybe it wasn't the thing that most people would think would be right to tell somebody, but as a mentor and a leader, he needed to check this brother right then and there, because as a black man, if you're going to be successful, you cannot go out there thinking that life is going to be fair. Should be fair, not going to be fair, not, and well, I've been around a long time, and I would have thought, yes, by this time, anyone would think that. Let me straighten my hat because I'm not twisted around. You would think that life would be fair, especially when like I said, I graduated high school in 73, and the incident happened to me, I think, in around that time, thrown out of the segregated restaurant. Very few people that are living can tell you they had that kind of experience. The thing with my dad and the guy with the 12 gauge shotgun and the incident. I think back and said, damn, how many people could tell this kind of story? So that's part of the reason I have to tell the story. My sister asked me to, my sister Linda, who actually convinced me to leave the job and come to college, which I really had no intention of going to college. I was like, high school, yes, because Dave would kill me if I don't graduate high school. But that's it. I don't want to see any more school. But my sister, who had gone on, she was a chemistry major, and she invited me, and never been on a college campus before. She invited me, and I went over, and they were having so much fun on the HBCU campus. I'm telling you, even now, you look back, it's like you could have too much fun, and I did initially, and I was getting ready to get sent back home, so I had to make some adjustments there because I was just partying. It was the only thing I saw. It was like party, and it was going down. So I did have a lot of fun, but the thing is, I wouldn't have done that, and I wouldn't have been able to achieve that if I didn't do the HBCUs. I had a friend when we were at North Carolina Central, and we were classmates, and he was, well, I think he was chemistry major and I was biology major, but we were taking some of the same classes because we were both pre-dental, and Marvin smart. I mean, Marvin was very smart kid. They accepted him at UNC Chapel Hill Dental School, and they let him matriculate to his junior year, and then they flunked him out somehow. But you got during that, and by going before going Howard and Meharry, by that time they would not accept you and take you back in. Um, and it hurt me. It hurt me because I know, because I studied with the brother. We had, we went through together. He could book harder than me, because it's all about booking and knowing. But no, it's a lot of networking, and when you're there and you're getting squeezed out, and that's what I'm telling you. Your kid, when you're sending your kid, because a lot of people have this false um, concept in their mind that if they graduate from a PWI, it'll look better on their resume, and sometimes it is, but most when you get out there in life and you really go on the job, people don't ask you a lot about where you graduated. It's did you pass the exams, did you do, and I gotta throw this in while I'm thinking about it. I also encountered a lot of things that are like, um, I don't know what do you call us? It's an some kind of racist thing, whereas it's racism even within our own blacks. Whereas there was this episode where Fred Sanford, he was supposed to go to the dentist, and it was a black dentist. He didn't want to be seen by the black dentist. He wanted a white dentist. Do you know, I've also experienced that when I was down in Louisiana, and I somehow took on this practice out in Hammond, and I'm quite sure because I have friends in Hammond. Hammond is different now, but back then they weren't used to seeing black dentists. So when I it showed up, it was some skepticism. You could tell a lot of people that just had not been used to seeing black dentists, and I actually bought a practice there on Railroad Avenue, but it used to be a white dental office. And that's why don't if you're black, don't go by a white dental office in the white zone most of the time in America, because it may happen like the lady's daughter came in and took a seat. I was in the back, and then by the time the mom parked the car and came in, she saw me and she said, "Oh my God, it's a nigger!" And she grabbed her daughter and they ran out. It was so damn funny. I had to have him in there. I'm in there laughing, and Hammond was crazy in that for me, and I was still living in New Orleans, so it was like uh, almost an hour drive to get there and back. And then I was doing it in the evening, moonlighting after my public health thing. But the I had to get out of that. I'm going back to New Orleans one evening, and this car pulls out beside me, and the shotgun blast, and it was this fire, and it was these white guys, and just having fun. They're yahoos, but they were just having fun, and it was just too much for me. And also, the KKK had a rally annually in front of the office, so I had to move and get out of there. And that was, matter of fact, the first practice that I ever owned. You learn a lot of, and that's why, listen, experience. Got to go ahead and get out there, just try things and have the experience, because the fun in that is actually in going through and learning from all of this stuff. But I was going back to because I wanted to tell the story really for my community and the people, because also I was going back some of the motivational kind of things though. I remember this lady who was this light skinned mulatto looking lady. She owned the store there, Miss Lillian. She owned the Black Country store, and there was a pool table in there, and I think they had drink beer, had beer, and so forth. But anyway, when I would go in there with my cousins, she would say, "Jerry, you shouldn't be in here. Dave wouldn't want you in here, and you could be doing this." And you ever how people could see things in you that and you're like, "What? Why not? I want to hang out here." You don't say that to them or whatever. But it was maybe the educational part, maybe, but I don't know, because I wasn't. I was still just country bumpkin kid. But sometimes people, and that's the thing that I think when you see in kids certain things, you have to find a way, because you never know how you affect someone, and for some reason, she kind of affected me in that, like I say, I'm in there probably when I was 16, 17, 18, and she was trying to discourage me from being there. And I was like, "Damn, you're making money here. You want everybody up in here." Anyway, so I think I covered most of what I wanted to lay out. No, I wanted to also tell you about this, so we don't forget and put things so far in the past. Like I say, this is things that I'm saying happened in my lifetime, and still there's a place in North Carolina called Smithfield. I mean, guys don't hate me in Smithfield. It's just the way it is. But until I was in dental school, like not dental school, undergrad at North Carolina Central University, where my niece and all of it, a lot of us, and some A&T and Aggies, but the Eagles at NCCU, love you guys. Anyway, we have an institution. So many of our family have gone through those institutions, federal, state. There's so many on the East Coast, just these HBCUs. I try to get my son to go, but he wants to stay here in California. But I, uh, I know that the things I have experienced or did experience with just the the staff, the instructors, the love, the feeling family is something that a lot of times people need. And the thing, and the reason I mentioned my niece Sydney is because when she was in North Carolina and going to a private, predominantly white, well, it was just private white academy. She didn't do well at all. My brother and sister-in-law, we all sat at their kitchen table and we talked about that. And then they happened to move when she was in high school and to California, and all of a sudden accelerated. It was a different atmosphere. And then went back to North Carolina to NCCU and graduated with in 3.5 years magna cum laude, and then moving on and going to applying now to medical school. I mean, the things that how in one environment versus another can change your child's trajectory and where they wind up. So I'm saying don't be deluded by this idea that placing them in some environment that, some kids are going to do really well in those environments, and Black kids, Latinos, and so forth, but others may not perform that well. And it would be better that they stay in an environment where they're comfortable and they feel that, because the thing is, when you're moving very fast at a fast track, I'm telling you, I know how it moves. I've been in competitive things. The dental school. I've done I did a program, an executive MBA program at UCLA, and I noticed, groups, when we break off and you got to go, and people, it becomes very competitive, and people have to group together but in certain things like dental school or whatever, when you can break off into your own groups, and if you're left and you're not in one of their groups, you don't really fit in. You're getting squeezed, so you could get really left behind, and then in your mind you become more dejected and you don't do well. So I'd like to see you focus as parents, think about that. Not that everybody needs to be there, but I'm saying sometimes they need that. They need that. I needed that. I would never have made it. And I see that it changed my niece in such a way. I had to look at it and I said, I got to tell her about that, talk about it. She's still to me like a little girl, but she's getting ready to go off to medical school. And all of a sudden, from going to, when we sat at the kitchen table and I listened to parents talking about how she was struggling to becoming like, bam, I was like, how did it happen? Yeah, yeah. And then, and her sister who's just graduating dental school, I'm proud of her, but I mean, Sydney was a turnaround story, and the turnaround I could tell was a different environment. Well, environment here wasn't, in high school wasn't an HBCU, but it was a different environment that allowed a child to be free and think and move. So same thing, I'm telling you, when encouragement, education was a big thing with Dave. He'd kill you if you didn't graduate. So and all of us 11 graduated high school except for one. He quit when my dad was sick, and he couldn't punish him the way that he would with us. So he didn't have that resistance, but he went on to own his own company and assets, and I think is doing really well. And most of my family, almost all of my family I could think about, are working either in their company or the family company, but except for my sister Linda, who encouraged everybody, and she encouraged me. She went on to do her master's in chemistry and had her own company, but she's into teaching, and she's in the Durham public high school. Well, it's middle school, I think it is, but everything is about my kids, and it's Black and Latino inner city kids. And I mean, they're lucky to have her, because I know she was the one that encouraged me, because I would have flunked out. You got to have somebody that's actually checking you, and she checked me on how I would be such a letdown to the family and the people, and all, because she's second from the oldest, and I'm third. So if I had disappointed, and my grades were so low that I was going to get sent back home, after this freshman year, and she started crying, and actually cursed out because I was like, "This is my life, damn it," and so forth. But then I felt her, how she would cry that I was not going to continue and I was going to let people down, and it changed my life. So, and I noticed with all of my nieces, my nephews, and everybody, and even my kids, she's gotten the whole family into this thing of like we're all going to the graduations, and I have to, and that's why I say coming May, I have to fly to Howard University. I'm flying to North Carolina Central University. I missed the one that graduated early, the one I was telling you about, because she completed in 3.5 years. It was in the middle of the year, and it's hard for me to get there. But then I go back to Meharry, and all of within a 2 week period. And because that's what we do, we have to support that thing, not the education. And if you don't have education, there's something wrong. But I'm telling you, if I got and I was the clown and hung out all of the corners, and with the guys, if I could do it and turn it around, anybody can. But you got to be able to program these kids when they're young. I wasn't that young at a time, because I guess some of those things that you get what I talk about, nature or nurture. There are some things that maybe are nature, but I think the nurturing, because I always saw my dad hustling, and never really at home. Um, except for on Sundays, having time, but he never worked that 9 to 5. And that was freedom. And that's the thing. And that's part of nurture, and didn't make a lot of money. It was always pretty much broke. But like I said, he had these trucks, and they would cut trees, and I see him pay the guys. He didn't have education, but he had his guys come on Saturday morning, and they get their pay, and whatever was left, but that was doing business. So once my brother he worked a couple of years, started his construction business. Everybody start their own business, and life is better like that. You have to own some assets, and then you start to build some wealth. If you don't own assets, then you just working someone else's job. And everybody, and not everybody needs to do this, because it's not easy, and a lot of people will fail because you have to learn a lot, know a lot. But I'm telling you, if you own some assets, you're much better off than just having a job. And that's the thing I see, that what has happened is that we're conditioned, and even the education is to go to school, study hard, get good grades, go and then get a job, get a good job, and then you feel secure. And now your jobs are getting snatched, especially with AI moving out. I seriously, and I'm I'm a sympathetic person, but if I can replace somebody with AI and save money, hell yeah, you would do it. Anybody that's in business, if you're doing it, you'll cut it. And a lot of things are starting to change. So you got to learn to swim, and the only way you're going to do it is getting experience. You got to get out there, do some things, get some experience under your belt, and with experience, you're going to fail sometimes. You're going to have times when you're going to have some failures. But if you chalk it up to, this is my learning, this is a cost of education, and you get out there and you do it, do things, and even if you have a failure, you get back in the game. I'm telling you, I'm having some of the most fun as far as doing things from business perspective now than I ever have, because I have the resources, the and it's just at a point. I know a lot of times people say, well, why don't you just stop? You've done quite well, and you could just stop. But you can enjoy playing the game if you know what you're doing. And that's the thing now. I'm spreading and helping other people do some things. But I really enjoy um, just the whole learning process, and most of it comes from experience. You have to get out there and get the experience. Otherwise, you could study and get the knowledge. And I've worked with people, and you tell people a lot of things, and you could put things in front of them, but most people aren't going to act. They're not going to act because they're afraid. They're afraid they might fail, and of course you might, and but you might learn. That's the cost also of learning. I skate, and even now, I don't skate as much, and I try not to do as much as I used to, because you will fall. And the way you learn to skate is to take a couple of falls, and then you learn. People tell you how to keep your balance and what not to do. But if you're going to learn to skate, you're going to fall. And if you're going to learn things about life, I call myself the entrepreneur dentist, because I went in it for that mindset. I'm using it as a business. That's the reason I'm going into it, and I like it. And it's something that, whether you have teeth or don't have teeth, you need to see the dentist. So it's one of those. Now that's some security in that. There is some security in having that, but not everyone has that. And even if you are a dentist, things can happen. I have now arthritis. I broke a bone in my wrist, so I'm left-handed, so I can't really do anything. So that's no security in that. You have to know. And then, but if you own businesses or real estate and or platforms, and you know how to make those work, then you can have some security. Now you can walk on a tightrope, without a net, because you know what you're doing and how to do it. And you've been there through experience. Get the experience, guys. I think I've done enough talking for today. But oh, I want to end with this. I think this was like George Clinton, or Bootsy. One of them, "Turn me loose, we shall overcome." And that was one of those George Clinton things, but I need to have that as my background music. I want you guys to kind of feel that "Turn me loose, we shall overcome." Where did you get your funk from? And that's where we get our funk from, our experiences. I swear, and I appreciate Yahweh giving me this, allowing me to pass through and experience everything that I have experienced. And I'm just trying to pass some things along. Hopefully, somebody benefits from my story, Dave's story. I could tell you a lot of things. There's a lot more to Dave's story, but he brought 11 kids along, and never having one of those, what they call job security. He did it all on a tight, but we were poor, dirt poor, even poorer than you can imagine living here. But no, you can. 11 kids in a four-room home on a farm, whereas my dad was sick at one point, and no money coming in, and they even had a point. My mom was trying to get some welfare, and because we owned that 19 acres, they were saying you write, or you sell the farm to the government, or you wheel it over, and then they could put it on the welfare. And we were like, wow. They would take our little 19 acres, the only thing we ever had and ever knew. But my sister still has that. It become like a 8-room home now, and there's just her there and their family. So we, yeah, the experience. But having that gave us freedom. I'm telling you, you gotta own some assets. You can't create wealth either without assets. There's so many benefits of owning assets, and performing assets is something I would like you guys to think about. Performing assets. That means that it's actually putting money in your pocket, and you're benefiting as you grow and go. Um, so many things that we need to know and act on. So until next time, I'm going to end this thing. Let me see how I exit. Thank you guys for being here.